The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Yo, Philly, how you's doing? Welcome to Philadelphia Baseball, past, present, and personal. I'm Bill Kashatus, your host on the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. This week, we're going to give you a preview of the Phillies-Cubs series in Chicago. At present, the Phillies, with a record of 31-26, are in third place in the National League East, 3 games behind the first-place Cubs and 1.5 behind second-place Washington. Over the weekend, they were swept by the Giants in San Francisco. The Cubs, on the other hand, have a 33-23 record and are in second place in the National League Central, just 2 games behind the division-leading Milwaukee Brewers. They're on a 4-game winning streak, having swept the Mets in New York over the weekend. My guest is a longtime Cubs fan, Bill Vaselopulos. Bill is also one of my best friends from college. Not only did he introduce me to Wrigley Field, but he and his family have always made me feel at home whenever I visit Chicagoland. My only regret is that I cannot be out there with him this week to watch our 2 teams compete. Bill will help us break down the upcoming 3-game series and talk a little bit about Chicago's rebuilding process, which began in October 2011 when the Cubs hired Theo Epstein as their general manager and culminated in 2016 with the organization's first World Championship since 1908. Welcome to the podcast, Bill.
Thank you very much, Bill. How are you doing?
Good. Say, what's the weather like out there in Chicago? Will we have some balmy weather for the Phillies-Cubs series, which begins tomorrow night?
Yes, for a change after a terrible month of April where it felt more like February than April. It's going to be in the 70s, and it's a bright, sunny day today, and all week it's supposed to be really nice weather.
Are you going to catch all 3 games?
I'm going to Tuesday and Thursday. I'm not going to the Wednesday game, though.
Yeah. Yes, Thursday is the day game. The first 2 are nights, so Thursday will be real nice. So I'm envious.
Yeah.
Listen, Bill, the Cubs have been playing pretty well lately. It looks like center fielder Albert Almora, mostly a leadoff hitter, is leading the regulars with a .317 batting average. Third baseman Chris Bryant is also off to a good start with a .400 on-base percentage. And second baseman Javier Baez must be a pleasant surprise in terms of power with 14 homers and 45 RBIs. Are those the keys to your offense, the usual keys, or, is that a little exceptional for this year?
No, that's about right. Baez actually coming up always had a lot of power, but he's a free swinger, and even to this day, he's starting to rein that in a little bit, but he still swings for the fences on the first few pitches that he sees. The most recent upswing, as you say, the Cubs won the last 4 games, and I think they're 7 out of 8 on a really successful road trip that they just finished, and now they're going to come home to play the Phillies. But other guys have started to pick it up. Anthony Rizzo had a terrible April. I mean, wasn't even batting 200, but he's the type of guy that you expect by the end of the season he's going to be where he normally is, and he's starting to do that now. And one pleasant surprise, a guy that every Cub fan's been waiting for to hit and justify his salary, is Jason Hayward, and he's been having 2 and 3 hit games over this road trip, so that's been nice to see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Rizzo, 245 with 8 home runs, 19 RBI. The other guy that I thought you might mention would be Kyle Schwarber, 262, 11 home runs, 28 RBI. He's a slow starter too, usually, isn't he?
Well, he's still so young. His quote first full season ended in the first week in 2016, and didn't come back to the World Series. So that was a wash. Then his second his first full season was last year. And I think that may be viewed in history as an anomaly that season. Joe Madden had it that he thought he could lead off, and I think that got into Kyle Schwarber's head. So the first half of last year, Kyle Schwarber could barely hit 200 in the leadoff position. Was sent down to the minors, and then came back in July for about 3 weeks, I think it was, and then came back in July, and then really started hitting, and was part of the Cubs' surge last year to win the Central Division last year, because they were trailing much of last year the Brewers, and finally caught them with some really good pitching, and among other people, Schwarber really turning it on in the second half. So I think he lost a lot of weight, Schwarber did, over this past winter, and he can always hit the ball, even in college. He was a great hitter. So I think what you're seeing now is a guy who's starting to hit to the opposite field more, which is now a new emphasis that Chili Davis, the new Cubs batting coach, is emphasizing with the team. And he's been showing some good signs of hitting it to all parts of the field and doing well with that.
Mm-hmm. You're absolutely correct. I mean, the Cubs pretty much are on fire over the last 7 games. They're hitting .330 as a team with 9 homers, 41 RBIs, and an on-base percentage of .405. So the Phillies are going to have to turn it around here. I mean, the Cubs are hot right now. There's no doubt about it. If we look at the Phillies offense, it's another situation entirely. Center fielder Odubel Herrera, .305 with 7 home runs, 32 RBIs, and second baseman Cesar Hernandez, who has a .373 on base percentage, have been the most consistent players. Although one of our biggest offseason acquisitions, Carlos Santana, has 9 homers and 33 RBIs. His .218 batting average is hurting the offense. He just has not delivered in the clutch. In addition, last year's rookie sensation, left fielder Rhys Hoskins, is trying to beat the sophomore jinx. He has 6 homers and 28 RBIs, but he's also struck out 61 times, and that's pretty disturbing for a guy who had such tremendous plate discipline last year. Another disappointment's been Michael Franco, .253, 8 home runs, 32 RBIs. He's probably the Phillies' most streaky hitter, and I know I'm sounding pretty critical of these guys, and maybe it's a little unfair in terms of Hoskins since he's only a second-year player, but when you look at Santana, an 8-year veteran who's being paid $60 million over 3 years, and Franco, who is now in his 4th year in the bigs, who has been basically told over the last 3 years, here's third base, take it, the job is yours. Well, when you consider those factors, those 2 players are especially underachieving. Much more was expected out of those guys, and they haven't delivered. One example, yesterday's 6-1 loss to the Giants, Santana hit a towering fly ball down the left field line in the first inning. It dropped in fair territory for a hit, and where's Santana? On first base, when he could have easily reached second. And had he been on second, Santana would have scored on Nick Williams' single left center. And that's just bad baseball. Very disappointing for a veteran player like that who was expected to lead a young team. Anyway, heading into tomorrow night's game, the Phillies offense is hitting .234 with a .315 on base percentage, and in the last 7 games, they're hitting an anemic .209 with a .260 OBP. They need to turn it around and fast because they're coming up, as I said, against a very hot Cubs team.
Well, hey, Phil, let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question about the lineup. Two guys you didn't mention. Your shortstop and your right fielder. They seem not to be producing at all.
Yeah, the shortstop position has been somewhat of a problem because J.P. Crawford started the season and then he went on the DL, and now we have Scott Kingery playing there, and he's a rookie. But he's a guy the Phillies expect big things out of in the future, and I think he's feeling the pressure right now. So we really, I mean, there have been flashes there, both offensively and defensively for Kingery, but he's not really, to be expected, I think, immediately to be a superstar. Right field has been a problem. Aaron Altair, who can hit, but tends to hit in streaks, is not producing, and that has been another trouble spot in the lineup for us. So yeah, we just really got to pick it up. We have to pick it up. Turning to pitching, if we look at the Cubs, John Lester is your ace, 6-2 with 61 Ks, with a 2.44 ERA, followed by Jose Quintana. Is it Quintana or Quintana? Quintana. 6-4, 57 Ks with a 4.30 ERA. Then you have Kyle Hendricks, I guess is your number 3 starter with a 4-4 record, because Yu Darvish, who's 1-3 with a 4.95 ERA in 8 starts, has been terrible. What is up with him?
A lot of Cub fans want to know what is up with him. Let me correct you on one thing. Lester is the leader of the staff. There's no question about that. Kyle Hendricks, though, is the number 2 guy. And he started the season as the number 2 pitcher. And with Darvish number 3 and Quintana number 4, that's how the season started. Tyler Chatwood, a guy they picked up from the Rockies, was number 5 and still is probably the worst pitcher. But the success, we mentioned the success of the Cubs in the last 8 or 9 games. As much as the offense picked up, the pitching has picked up. Lester, the last 5 or 6 starts, has been lights out. Hendricks is starting to pitch like he has the last couple of years. And Quintana has had a couple of good outings the last couple times, too. Going 6 or 7 innings, all 3 of those guys going 6 or 7 innings with, only 1 run scored against them. So that's been a pleasant surprise. And to get to your question about Darvish, coincidentally, during this hot streak of the Cubs, Darvish has been on the DL. I don't think that's a coincidence, because every time Darvish has gotten up there, he pitches pretty well the first 3-4 innings, but the 5th inning has been the bugaboo for him. If you look at his starts, the 5th inning, he gets lit up. 4, 5, 6 runs sometimes, all in the 5th inning. What's going on with him? Well, everyone knew about Yu Darvish when he came into the league many years ago for the Rangers. I have to admit, I never saw him pitch extensively because he was in the American League and I'm more of a National League guy. When he came to the Dodgers last year, Cubs faced them in the playoffs, and Cubs lost to the Dodgers in the playoffs, and Darvish was part of that reason, and pitched pretty well for the Dodgers last year. But now that he's with the Cubs, he's an unusual guy. He has literally 6 different pitches that he throws. He throws them all. And of those 6 pitches, he has variations on those pitches. On top of that, he has 2 different windups. He has a regular, what you would consider a regular windup, and then he has this hesitation, which I never really realized before. But with the Cubs, he's been doing it a lot. Well, he'll go into his motion and then hesitate as he's standing there on 1 foot. His 1 foot's on the rubber. He's got his left leg up in the air, and he's just holding it, and he's hesitating, and then pitches. I mean, obviously, it's to throw the timing off of the batter and things like that. But I think between the multitude of pitches and there's two different types of deliveries, his control is way off. And mentally, it appears he gets easily rattled. In the fifth inning, as I said, he's gotten hit, and when he gets hit, you can kind of see the wheels start coming off. And I think that's a mental game as much as anything. So it'll be interesting what the Cubs pitching coaches do with him, try to get him mentally as much as physically set up for the rest of the season. He's on the DL right now with shoulder tightness. I don't know. This is his second stint on the DL. The first stint was also for a very minor period of time. And I don't know how much of it is physical versus mental. And they may be taking this opportunity to give him a mental break along with to address any physical ailments he may have. But I think it's a combination of just lack of control with an inconsistent or a huge repertoire, inconsistent pitching motion and a huge repertoire. Maybe they need to rein all that in, stick to 3 or 4 pitches, stick to one motion until you get your control, and then expand from there as the season goes on. At least that's what I hope they do. Yeah, he's been a big puzzle, and Cub fans, you know, it's a big market, and they're looking over at your team, and they're a little envious of Jake Arrieta, because it really was Arrieta or Darvish. The Darvish is filling Arrieta's spot, and when Darvish was signed, I think even at the last minute they went back to Arrieta again after trying to sign him, saying, hey, you know, I think we've got Darvish, and will you be willing to come back for this amount? And, you know, Arrieta said, thanks, but no thanks. He was looking for some big money because I think this is going to be his last really big contract. So Cub fans are a little envious of your team and your ace.
Yeah, I want to get back to Arrieta and talk about him in depth. But your points are well taken about Darvish. I had always wondered, because in amateur baseball, if you have that purposeful stall in the middle of your delivery, that's a balk, and it's called as such.
It happened once this year, and he was shocked that there was a guy on second base, and the umps called a balk on him when he was doing that. And apparently it's something that he's always done, and the umpires have let him get away with it. But he did get called once this year. And you should see the surprise on his face when it was called. He's like, I do this all the time. What are you talking about? But
well, it is. I mean, it's a deceptive motion, and as you pointed out, it's worked against him, because when you start changing your delivery like that, your release point goes off. Sometimes your arm slot goes off, and you know, I think you're absolutely right. When you play with the mechanics like that, it's very difficult to establish a consistent delivery, and that has got to be part of his problem. It'll be interesting to see how the Cubs turn him around, because he has been a major disappointment. Now, having said that, the Cubs pitching has held opponents to just a 219 average in the last 7 games to a 205 average, which is just about what the Phillies team batting average is right now. So, you know,
the Cubs pitching right now is overall, I think, the second best in all of baseball in terms of earned run averages and things. And that's, you know, despite Tyler Chatwood, who walks a ton of guys and because of that has a high ERA, and Darvish, who hasn't been all that great, but the bullpen has been lights out, and the other 3 starters that we mentioned earlier, at least the last 2-3 weeks, have been really good. So that ERA, they've always been in the top 10 or maybe top 5 in ERA, but right now they're number 2, and that's what's really helped them over the last 10 games.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's look at the Phillies pitching because it is what has kept them near the top of the NL East this season. I would say, yes, Jake Arrieta is the ace of the team because of his veteran status. He doesn't have the best numbers, obviously. Aaron Nola has the best numbers. He's 7-2 with 74 strikeouts and a 2.18 ERA. And then he's followed by Arrieta, who's 5-3 with 44 strikeouts and a 2.66 ERA. Nick Pivetta and Vince Velasquez have 4 wins each, and Velasquez leads the team in strikeouts with 79. Our closer is Hector Neris with 9 saves, but an inflated 5.25 ERA. Luis Garcia leads the relievers in holds with 9. The Phillies pitching has held opponents to a 238 average, but in the last 7 games, opponents have hit 244 against them. So really based on the two teams' recent offensive production and pitching, I got to give the Cubs the advantage going into this series. Now, Arrieta pitched yesterday, so I doubt, you're going to see him in Chicago, but I want to talk a little bit about him. He's been a wonderful addition to the Phillies, not only in terms of his pitching, but in terms of his leadership. As I've already said, he's 5-3 after yesterday's 6-1 loss to the Giants, but he's pitched much better than his record shows. The Phillies simply have not given him much offensive support. In fact, the one run they scored in yesterday's game was on an Arrieta homer, the 6th of his career. But he's a much different pitcher than he was in Chicago, and especially different than he was in 2015 when he won the Cy Young. That year he averaged 9.3 strikeouts per start. This year he's averaging 6.2 strikeouts per start, and his velocity is down by 2 miles an hour. I would argue he pitches to contact and gets a lot of fly and ground ball outs. I'd also argue that he has had to become a smarter pitcher than he was with the Cubs. I also like his veteran presence with a young team like the Phillies and their rookie manager, Gabe Kapler. Ironically, Kapler, who has 1 year of managing in low A ball on his resume, is best known for his analytic bent and kumbaya approach to the game. But yesterday, Arrieta made it clear that Kapler and his coaches hadn't done their homework. Arrieta pitched well until the 6th inning when he allowed 5 straight hits, including Andrew McCutchen's 3-run homer. 3 of those hits came on ground balls, including a weak grounder to rookie shortstop Scott Kingery and another single hit through the right side by Joe Panik against the shifted infield. After the game, Arrieta complained to the press that the Phillies, quote, are the worst in the league with shifts, and that, quote, we need to have an accountability check all the way around. Everybody, top to bottom, he added. When asked if he thought the team had the ability to do that, Arrieta replied, quote, if there's not, I'll make sure there is, end of quote. I got to tell you, Bill, that was music to my ears. What we've lost in this game is accountability, and not just the Phillies. We've lost it because of free agency, multi-million-dollar salaries, and an overemphasis on analytics. What are your thoughts about Arrieta and about the accountability issue?
Well, there's a lot there. Arrieta, for a little background for some of your listeners who, well, they probably know if they've heard the history of Arrieta, but just for those that may not, the Cubs picked him up in one of the most one-sided trades they've ever had during the Epstein years from the Baltimore Orioles. And the Baltimore Orioles, who are not maybe the best-run organization, they taught all their pitchers to pitch the exact same way. mechanics, motion, all that stuff. They wanted the Orioles way when it came to pitching, and that required Arrieta to pitch in a Met way and a motion that it wasn't natural to him. And I think the Cubs picked up on that because he was very erratic as a starting pitcher with the Orioles. They got him to Chicago, and pitching coach at the time, Chris Basio, from the Cubs, basically just said, pitch the way you want to pitch, and they worked on that. And he has a very unusual delivery. He toes the rubber on the far right third base side of the rubber, and he kind of comes across his body a little bit, so he develops this angle going away from right-handed batters, going into left-handed batters. And with his velocity, he was lights out during 2015 when he won the Cy Young. He had an incredible year. Threw a couple no-hitters, won that year, won the following year in 2016, if I recall, and was really good. But velocity started to escape him, and he struggled for a while. And I think the Cubs are a little leery about that. And one of the reasons they kind of let him go on the market and see what he could get. This offseason, the market was really weird, and he probably could have signed for the Cubs for more money, or definitely for longer than I think he signed with the Phillies for 3 years. He could have signed a longer contract with the Cubs.
Right, the Cubs. I believe the Cubs offered him $125 million for 4. The Phillies are paying him $75 million for 3, and it's a steal.
Yeah. Regarding the analytics and stuff, now remember he came from, a few years on the Cubs with Joe Maddon, and Joe Maddon is an analytics guy too. He looks at all the numbers. He plays hunches sometimes, but he'll look at numbers. One thing that Maddon did, he does it with his own team. He does it with the opposing pitchers. Is he'll look at the pitchers themselves, and he'll determine what are the pitchers' strengths and weaknesses as they pitch against certain hitters. So he's not just looking at the hitter and saying, okay, the hitter always hits the ball to left field or right field 80% of the time. We're going to do the shift accordingly to where the spray chart is of the hitter. Maddon took into account where the pitcher is going to pitch him and what the pitching coach and the bench coach worked with the pitcher and the catcher before the game as how they're going to attack different guys. And they will adjust those shifts accordingly. Now, I don't know what, the background of I saw that quote too from Arrieta. I don't know the background about the shifts with Philly, but Arrieta is a really smart guy, and he's an extremely hard worker. His work ethic is second to none, by the way. His workout routines are legendary. But if he's pitching a certain way and wants to attack guys a certain way, and the shift isn't benefiting him but hurting him, where someone could go, opposite field on him because he's pitching low and away to a huge gap because the shift is in the other direction, that's going to hurt him. And, that could be, I don't know, but that could be one of the reasons he's showing a lot of frustration. Another one could be that you've got a rookie manager, and he wasn't going to criticize Joe Maddon. If Joe Maddon did things, and believe me, Joe Maddon did a few things that probably upset him over his tenure with the Cubs, taking him out early and stuff like that. And you kind of could tell he was upset, Arrieta. He was upset being taken out early. He was upset about how he was being handled at times. But he never really criticized Joe Maddon for, I think, a few reasons. First of all, there were a lot of leaders on the Cubs team. He wasn't the only leader. In fact, he was kind of growing into the leadership role. But Maddon also had a lot of credibility. I mean, he was manager of the year, won a World Series. It's a little bit different than a rookie manager. So I think all these different factors are coming into play regarding his comments. He may see a lack of leadership on the team. He may see a rookie manager making mistakes. He is a very outspoken guy by nature. I mean, he's a Texan, and he speaks his mind. I'm not that surprised by these comments. I hope he doesn't alienate people. That was the one thing on the Cubs when he was on the Cubs, and how Maddon dealt with the team was They dealt with a lot of potential little fires and potential alienations within the team very well, and it never really bubbled to the surface. So this will be a challenge to see how your skipper handles some of these challenges.
That is great background on Arrieta and on Madden. There's no question that Madden is an eccentric innovator with very old school leadership style. I mean, he was raised in the old school, and he was the key to the Cubs rebuild. Tom Verducci, who wrote a real interesting book titled The Cubs Way, says that Madden focused on the mental side of the game as much as the physical and emphasized team chemistry as well as the analytics. Now, I have not met or talked with Gabe Kapler. I think the Phillies want to keep him away from guys like me. From everything that I've read and everything I've heard, very enthusiastic guy, very passionate guy, very smart guy in terms of analytics. I would like to think that he'd grow into another Joe Madden, but he just does not have the old school background that's necessary to manage at least veterans. And I think this is going to become a point of contention as this season unfolds, and definitely as the Phillies go into the free agent market over the next year or so, because they're talking about Manny Machado, they're talking about Bryce Harper, and these are other guys that, you can't manage the same way you manage a young team. And this analytics thing, I'm still on the fence about it. I do believe that analytics are a good supplement to traditional baseball. At one point I figured, well, let's see. Let's see if analytics brings accountability back into the game. And one might be able to say is that. I've seen Gabe Kapler sit Nick Williams down when his statistics, his hitting statistics, don't warrant a start. But on the other hand, there's a part of me that says, look, how can you argue with the traditional stats of RBIs, batting average, and homers? There's something to be said for on-base percentage, but when you start looking at all these other esoteric stats, it seems to me that you're just kind of making excuses to put somebody in the lineup when they don't deserve to be there. If you are facing a shift, well, come on. If you're in the major leagues and you can't go oppo, you don't belong there. I'm sorry. I just don't buy into this stuff as 100% proof. I just don't buy into it. Again, I think the information is very good. It's very useful, but you need also to manage by your gut, by an understanding of what your players can do in what given situation. And I think the tried and true traditional statistics for pitchers and hitters are really the best measures of accountability that there are.
Madden, one of the elements he really looks at a lot is the stuff of the opposing pitcher. Not just righty-lefty, but just the stuff of the opposing pitcher and how that matches up or doesn't match up with his hitters. And the luxury that Madden has, and it's a testament to Theo Epstein, he has so many versatile players, guys he could plug in and out in multitudes of positions. I mean, most of the guys on the team can play 2 positions, some of them up to 4 positions. So he has the ability to mix and match depending on the opposing pitcher as to what their strengths or weaknesses are. Is he a ground ball pitcher? Is he a fastball pitcher? Does he throw up and in? Does he throw low and away? What are the strengths? What are the hitter's strengths? And match things up really well. That seems to be a strength. I think sometimes he does a little bit too much, because then he takes certain guys out of their rhythm of playing. They're hot, and then they get benched all of a sudden. I was like, well, why did that guy get benched? You kind of wonder, because he's doing so well. Well, he's facing a pitcher that's going to eat him up, is Madden's theory, at least. Especially with the younger players. He doesn't like to expose his younger players to those things and lose confidence, which kind of goes to what you were saying about building confidence, letting the veterans play, letting bring along the rookies. That strategy also, everyone plays on the Cubs. Everyone has a lot of at-bats over the course of the season, and they all know that. So there's not too many, offensive players that are going to be disgruntled, because they're all going to get a lot of at-bats. And one final point I wanted to make about managing styles and stuff about what Madden likes to, like you said, bring in distractions to take the pressure off of team. He's notorious or famous for having, dress up road trips where you dress up as a certain theme, like a 70s theme, or a favorite band member, or your favorite team that you root for, and everyone's wearing that team's jersey. I don't mean baseball, I mean other sports. He brings animals into spring training, like a petting zoo kind of thing. And that was really important early on, because you had it with the Cubs. You had, been 108 years since the last victorious World Series. And there's a lot of pressure. And these kids were really young at the time. So he did a lot of things to distract and took a lot of the pressure off of them by putting it on himself, or just lighten up the mood. So he's got an interesting managing style. It's somewhat criticized sometimes the way he handles pitchers during the playoffs. That's another topic. But it'll be interesting how your manager deals with some of this adversity. You mentioned, how will he be able to handle some of the veterans? One of my favorite players of all time was a previous manager of yours, and, he left. Ryan Sandberg left because I don't think he could deal with the veterans all that well. So it'll be interesting how this guy handles that.
Well, and Ryan Sandberg was the antithesis of really the analytics. He was old school. And there you go. You got a Hall of Famer raised in the old school and can't manage veterans. I think, right now it'll be interesting to see. We got a new school manager. Let's see how he's going to go with veterans. I'm glad, however, you did bring up the final game of the 2016 World Series, because I think, that's Madden's one fault, and it speaks to my point about analytics. The mind game that he was playing with Aroldis Chapman and having him throw so many pitches, in one inning, saving him for the final game and having so many more pitches left. Now there's a perfect example of how analytics almost screwed him over and cost the Cubs the World Series. I mean, it's very difficult to argue that he almost lost it with his analytic bent or his numbers game with Aroldis Chapman. Now, many of the national prognosticators were saying that Joe Madden was just trying to put his signature on that game. I don't think so. I mean, I think that was a perfect example of Joe Madden looking at analytics and also looking at matchups, hitter versus pitcher, and again, it almost blew up. So, that's my one.
He didn't. I agree with you. He didn't factor in the impact. Excuse me. The impact that multiple innings would have on Chapman's, physical being, and also his mental being. I mean, he's a closer that comes in the ninth inning, 3 outs, he's done. I don't know how many times he ever came in the eighth inning, at all throughout his career. And he was doing it constantly during the World Series. If I remember correctly, I think he may have come in at the end of the seventh inning in Game 7, if I remember correctly. No,
he did.
And the whole thing was kind of messed up because he had bought the whole pitching. It wasn't just Chapman. But that Game 7, they took Hendricks out maybe a little sooner than they should have. They brought Lester in at the wrong time. Lester was going to come and pitch Game 7. That was the plan. But they brought him in at the wrong time during the middle of an inning, and they told Lester, you're going to come in at the beginning of an inning. You're a starter. We're going to start you at the beginning of the inning. But no, they brought him in at the middle of the inning. And, thank God it rained, and thank God for Jason Hayward's speech, and the Cubs got a little lucky and they won. So,
now having said that about Joe Madden, as you know, up in northeastern Pennsylvania where I teach, Joe Madden is a folk hero. I mean, he's from Hazleton. Yeah. He has done tremendous things for that community. He started the Hazleton Integration Project, which brings together Dominican youth, because Hazleton is heavily populated by Dominicans. Dominican youth with, white, the white native kids, and brings them together around sports.
Bill, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you know what he's doing today? Today's an off day, and he was in New York. Guess where he's at today?
No idea.
Home. He did not take the team flight home from New York to Chicago. He went to Hazleton.
Oh, did he go to Hazleton?
He's doing a fundraiser today, the off day, in Hazleton, and I assume tonight he's flying back to Chicago for tomorrow's series. So it's a perfect example.
And I had the opportunity actually to sit down and talk with him. I mean, if things worked out, I would have been running a tournament team called Madden's Cubs, for that organization. But for various reasons, it just didn't work out. But he does seem like a genuine guy, and again, he is a folk hero, and rightfully so. In northeastern Pennsylvania, and particularly in Hazleton. In our remaining time, Bill, I do want to talk about the rebuilding process. As you know, the Phillies are in year 4 of a rebuilding process that began arguably in 2015 when Andy MacPhail was hired as team president. Since then, the Phillies have followed a similar formula as the Cubs did between 2012 and 2016. And that formula is slash payroll, reduce the team's average age, and replenish the farm system before investing in top-tier free agents. Bill, tell us about the Cubs rebuilding process. What were the key transactions there?
Well, what the framework that you outlined was roughly what the Cubs did. It really started with ownership. We got new ownership. The Ricketts family came in and bought, and they pledged that they were going to hire the best that they could hire and stay out of their business. And, they got lucky. Lucky in the sense that, the best young general manager, Theo Epstein, became available. After winning 2 World Series with the Boston Red Sox, he was kind of the perfect pick, a guy that would come in to write up a franchise, to deal with decades of losing, like the Red Sox had done, the curses at Bambino. Cubs had the Billy Goat curse. He was a young guy with some progressive thoughts, but most importantly, he is a very articulate and well-spoken individual. And when he first came, he said, this is what we're going to do, everybody. This is what we're going to do, and we're gonna unload salary. We're going to trade people where we need to. We need to get better organizationally. We're going to revamp the minor leagues totally. We're going to create a new Cubs philosophy. So it was two-pronged. It was really the first thing they addressed was the minor leagues. The Cubs had a horrendous draft history. The Cubs have always been losing pretty much for the last 50 years. They've had some greatness here and there, but for the most part, they have had many losing seasons. But, in the last 50 years, they've maybe had 5 guys who you could name coming out of the draft who were good players, names you would recognize. It's a terrible record. So he wanted to rebuild the minor league system from the ground up, bring in a whole new philosophy. So he started that, and then he would unload salary, like you said, the Phillies have been doing, just to get rid of some deadwood, to clear up salary, to bring in a new culture, to get rid of some of the old dinosaurs that had been on the major league roster. And then he started making some very shrewd trades at the trading deadline. He would sometimes bring in free agent pitchers for the sole purpose of trading them at the trading deadline. And his best trades have been trades involving starting pitching. The steal of all steals is signing Scott Feldman, starting pitcher, maybe a number 3 pitcher, and then trading him to the Orioles because they thought they were going to make a run, and they picked up Arrieta and Pedro Strop. I mean, Feldman for Strop would be a decent trade and a good trade because Feldman never amounted to anything. Also, Steve Clevenger, who was a backup catcher, was involved in that trade going to the Orioles. But getting Strop and, a Cy Young, what became a Cy Young Award winner, that was considered one of the big steals. A couple other big trades. They traded Ryan Dempster to Texas, and they got in return, I believe it was, Kyle Hendricks. And then Matt Garza, another guy they traded to Texas, and they got Justin Grimm and Harold Edwards and Neil Ramirez, who was pretty good but got injured. So they made a lot of trades. Samardzija and Hamill, trading them to Oakland for Addison Russell. So the trades basically took the team and tanked the team. So you gained a lot by the trades with a lot of good minor leaguers to bolster the system. And even if the minor leaguers never became major leaguers, competition in the minor leagues is very important. And also each of the teams during those first 4 or 5 years under Theo Epstein really were terrible and put them in top 5 position in terms of the draft for the following year. And they drafted, some great draft picks. They got Almora, they got Schwarber, they've got Bryant, and most recently Ian Happ, who are all on the major league roster right now. So it was a combination of good management, picking the right guys, and then Epstein. And one other thing I want to reemphasize is he articulated what the Cubs were going to do and why that was so important. When you come into a fan base of 100 years of not winning, there will be a lot of questions. What he did was he spoke honestly. And in Chicago, that's a refreshing change for the press, so that the press really, he turned the press on his side because he was speaking honestly to the press. So that when the fan base got upset of continued losing at the beginning of Epstein's years, and why aren't they picking this guy up in a trade? Why are they doing that? And you know how toxic the sports radio can be. The press and the sports radio anchors were behind Epstein and basically telling the fans, you haven't been listening to Epstein. Epstein told you this is what it's going to be like. This is the plan, and he's not going to upset the plan by bringing in some guy that doesn't make sense at this stage. You don't want to say we're tanking, but they're tanking. They want to tank to get better players in the draft, to get better players in trades, and we'll be good later on. You just got to be patient and stop being so impatient. So it was funny how the press was were supporting the Cubs in that way, which was genius, I think, by Epstein, how he manipulated that to a certain extent so that everyone was kind of on the same page. And you know, you got to be a little lucky in the draft. And the Cubs, they must have some tremendous evaluators because they have been hitting on all their picks. You know, 5, 6 in a row now. They have hit on first-round picks, whereas the last 50 years, there were probably 5 household names in the last 50 years, and now they've gotten 5 in the last 5 years. So it's an interesting process, and I think he's going to be going into the Hall of Fame, Theo Epstein, at some point.
Oh yeah, undoubtedly. I mean, Billy Beane may have started the analytics movement, but Theo Epstein has refined it and actually has put his own spin on it. Correction, Bill James might have started the analytics movement, and Beane brought it into Major League Baseball, but Epstein has refined it, made it his own, and has shown success. The success that Beane simply was not able to achieve with the A's.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of talk about how you would think people would stay away from Theo Epstein in trades because he's fleeced so many guys. Now, the more recent trades he's made, we'll see what happens. You know, the Aroldis Chapman trade, Cubs gave up some really good players for that. Their shortstop, Torres, was a Cubs international free agent acquisition, I believe. And, you know, he potentially could be great, but the Cubs had 2 shortstops in waiting, really. I mean, they have Addison Russell, and Javier Baez is a shortstop by trade, who you will, by the way, you're going to see Baez, I think, playing short in this upcoming series because Russell just sprained his finger last night's game. So you're going to be seeing Baez at short. But another trade, the Quintana trade, getting Jose Quintana from the White Sox. They gave up an outfielder, Eloy Jimenez, who, you know, remember that name for the White Sox. He's going to be, I think, a monster kind of player. But you got to give up quality to get quality, and Jose Quintana is a very good starting pitcher under a tremendously affordable contract for a few more years. So those are hard to come by. So that's how he's built the team. You know, through some dumps, building up the minor leagues, really being smart about who they're picking up because he seems to be hitting on all the cylinders of most of the guys he trades for. And then in the draft, really scoring big on that. And you know, one thing about the draft, he has targeted offensive players more than pitchers because I think the philosophy is offensive players from colleges, because he's also targeted college players for the most part, not high school players. They're more experienced. They will get to the major leagues faster, and they're more reliable than a pitcher. And I think the philosophy is we'll draft hitters and we will trade or pick up free agencies for free agent pitchers because I think the philosophy is let another organization develop that pitcher, and if they're looking good, we'll try to get them, as opposed to taking flyers on pitchers from the draft directly because they're just such an unknown. You know, that said, though, the last draft that they had last year, their number one pick was a pitcher, and many of their draft picks last year were a lot of pitchers because they spent 5 years not drafting pitchers, and the minor league system is kind of devoid of quality pitching, so they need to balance that out a little bit.
I think,
but that was their philosophy.
I think the Phillies are also going that route in terms of the college players that they're drafting. They were burnt by Jesse Biddle, who was a local Germantown Friends School prospect who I guess last I heard was in Toronto. And now Mickey Moniak, who was their number one draft pick, I think 2 years ago, doesn't look like he's doing too well in the low minors. So a lot of people that the Phillies are going after are college products. Tomorrow night's game begins at 8:05 at Wrigley Field, and Zach Eflin will be going for the Phillies against Kyle Hendricks. So get ready for some good baseball. And Bill, hey, thanks for being with us. It was fun. Have a great time with our buddy Tom Havlin out there at Wrigley over the next few days.
Yeah, I'm sorry you couldn't join us, Bill, but it should be a lot of fun. Should be a lot of fun.
And thank you, Philly fans, for tuning in. See you next week for another podcast of Philadelphia Baseball, past, present, and personal. This is Bill Kashatus, rounding third and heading home on the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network.